What if everything changed overnight? What if, one morning, the people of Burkina Faso woke up not to the speeches of a revolutionary leader, but to breaking news of his assassination? April 16, 2025, a date that could have plunged an entire nation into chaos. In the shadows of Ouagadougou, a sinister plan was unfolding. A plan designed to silence Captain Ibrahim Traoré. A plan that involved betrayal at the highest levels, from within his own army. A plot backed by enemies of progress, fueled by fear of a rising Africa, and orchestrated with deadly precision. But they failed. This is the story of the failed assassination of Burkina Faso's most controversial and courageous leader. Of how traitors within the military were exposed. Of how foreign interests and terrorist collaborators nearly changed the course of history. And of how the people, from the streets of Ouagadougou to the heart of Paris, rose in unity and defiance. This isn't just about Traoré. It's about the future of the Sahel. About sovereignty, betrayal, and survival. Stay with us as we uncover the events of April 16th, the day they tried to kill a revolution. What you're about to hear isn't just another news story. It's the chilling truth behind a deadly plot to assassinate President Ibrahim Traoré, destabilize Burkina Faso, and throw the entire Sahel into turmoil. At the heart of it all, a plan to drag the country back into the grip of imperial control. But that's not all. This story also exposes how external influence, particularly from France, can push one African nation to turn against another. It's a painful reminder of the lengths some forces will go to in order to stop Africa from standing on its own feet. Before we dive deeper into this shocking series of events, please make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss important updates like this. According to a public statement from Burkina Faso's Minister of Security, the assassination plot began to unfold several weeks ago. The country's intelligence service had been closely monitoring suspicious chatter. What they discovered was disturbing. Intercepted communications between a high-ranking individual and known terrorist leaders. These exchanges weren't just casual messages. They contained sensitive information about the positions of Burkina Faso's defense forces, internal security operations, and even the movements of the volunteers for the defense of the homeland. It was a massive breach, one that, if successful, could have brought the country to its knees. And yet, this plot was stopped, just in time. Someone inside the system was leaking sensitive military secrets, not just vague rumors or half-truths, real, precise information about Burkina Faso's defense operations. The kind of intel that only someone on the inside could access. And they were sending it straight to the enemy, to terrorist leaders. As soon as these shocking communications were intercepted, they were rushed to top security officials in the country. What followed was a swift and discreet investigation. But from the very start, one thing was clear. This betrayal came from within the Burkinabe army. And after weeks of digging, the truth came out. The mole wasn't just any soldier. He was an officer, someone trusted, someone respected. His name? Bahari Abdraman, a member of the Military Justice Battalion, a man who had sworn an oath to protect his country, now exposed as a traitor of the highest order. Let's stop for a moment and really think about this. How does a soldier, a man who's worn the uniform, who's seen the horrors of terrorism firsthand, who's probably carried the bodies of fallen comrades, turn around and hand over national secrets to those very same killers? This wasn't just betrayal. It was personal. It was painful. Imagine what President Traoré must have felt when he learned that someone from within his own ranks had chosen to side with the enemies of the nation. But unfortunately, this is just the beginning. What comes next will leave you speechless. As the investigation deepened, military officials turned their focus to the traitors' unit of assignment. And what they found was even more disturbing. It turns out Bahari Abdraman had been missing for weeks. Not on leave, not reassigned. He had simply vanished without permission, a blatant act of desertion. His superiors, unaware of the sinister truth, had already begun the formal process of labeling him a deserter under military law. At the time, They might have assumed he had run off due to stress or personal issues, but they were wrong. He hadn't just abandoned his post, he had run after betraying his nation. And the worst part, he wasn't alone. The pattern of betrayal ran deeper than anyone expected. The kind of detailed intel that had been passed to terrorists could never have come from one man alone. It was a network, a web of treachery inside the Burkinabe military, and the authorities were beginning to unravel it. One by one, more names surfaced. Compaoré Joani, an active duty officer in the Burkinabe army. Zerbolao Coup, a former non-commissioned officer. Commander Ouedraogo Frederick, who was on duty at Burkina Faso's Integrated Operations Center, one of the most sensitive posts in the military. And perhaps most shocking of all, Kabore Constantine, an officer who had gone abroad for military training in Europe, only to abandon the Burkinabe army and join the armed forces of Ivory Coast. Each of these men had once taken an oath to protect their homeland. Instead, they became instruments of destruction. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a full-blown conspiracy, one that could have brought down the leadership, dismantled national defense, and opened the floodgates to foreign interference and terror. And yet, the truth was coming to light. The cracks were being sealed, but the fight was far from over. All of these officers, every single one of them, weren't acting alone. They were part of something bigger, something far more dangerous. According to intelligence reports, this wasn't just a rogue group of soldiers plotting in secret. No, this was a coordinated effort backed by foreign powers. And at the center of it all, support from authorities in Ivory Coast. The plan was chilling in its ambition, to completely destabilize Burkina Faso, and then use the chaos as justification to hand over the country's leadership to an international organization, one that could quietly steer Burkina Faso back under foreign influence, not just for a year or two, but for the next 10 to 20 years. Let that sink in. The ultimate goal wasn't just to remove President Traoré, it was to erase the progress he's made, to dismantle his bold vision of sovereignty, self-reliance, and African unity, to silence a leader who dares to say no to neo-colonial control. Because make no mistake, there are powerful people who are deeply uncomfortable with what Traoré represents. They don't like that he's cutting ties with exploitative foreign interests. They don't like that he's building African-led institutions. And they definitely don't like that he's inspiring a new generation to stand up for their continent. So, instead of confronting him in the open, they chose sabotage, backdoor alliances, bribed soldiers, and covert operations meant to collapse the state from within. But how exactly did they plan to execute this takeover? What was the blueprint behind this elaborate scheme? Let's break it down, step by step. Step 1. Sabotage the country's security by feeding sensitive military intel to terrorist groups. With this information in hand, the terrorists would be able to launch precise and devastating attacks, targeting soldiers, civilians, and government facilities. Each successful strike would paint a grim picture. It would make it seem like the government had lost control, and more importantly, it would make Traoré look weak. The plan was psychological warfare. The more Burkina Faso bled, the more people, even loyal supporters, would start to question whether Traoré could really handle the rising insecurity. Distrust would grow, confidence would collapse, and eventually, protests would erupt, not just in the streets, but even within the army. Step 2. Create division inside the very institution meant to defend the country. The conspirators began spreading false intelligence within Burkina Faso security forces, carefully crafted lies meant to manipulate President Traoré himself. Their goal? To push him into making a fatal mistake, ordering the arrest of innocent soldiers, loyal men, patriots. By framing them as traitors, the conspirators hoped to turn the army against itself. They wanted confusion, they wanted fear, they wanted to sow deep mistrust within the military, so deep that even Traoré wouldn't know who to trust anymore. And here's the most terrifying part. This wasn't just a plan on paper, it had already started. Security breaches, leaked information, disinformation campaigns, all of it had been set in motion. The trap was laid, and the country was inching dangerously close to the edge. But the question now is, how far did this go? And how did President Traoré respond once the pieces of this dark puzzle started coming together? The traitors didn't just leak information, they took their deception to a whole new level. They began sending forged messages, crafted to look like official communications from the Burkinabe army. These messages were sent directly to senior officers and corps commanders, warning them that their names were on a supposed military blacklist, that they were about to be arrested, that the government no longer trusted them. Imagine being a loyal officer and suddenly receiving a message like that. Fear spreads, trust evaporates. These commanders began to question everything, their orders, their superiors, even President Traoré himself. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast, but the plot didn't stop there. Third, the conspirators sought out an even more delicate target, the spiritual and traditional leaders of Burkina Faso, leaders who hold deep influence over communities and even military men. According to Burkinabe investigators, these plotters either bribed or threatened religious and cultural figures to help sway military officers into joining the plan. And it worked. One of the officers who was allegedly convinced through this method was Captain Ouedraogo René Davids, who has since disappeared without a trace, another ghost in the fog of betrayal. Fourth, they targeted one of President Traoré's boldest initiatives, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, the grassroots militia force created to defend communities from terrorism. The traitors began funneling money to certain individuals within this group, not to strengthen them, but to corrupt them, to demoralize them, to whisper lies. The goal was to convince these fighters that Traoré had betrayed them, that their sacrifices were in vain, that they should quit, walk away, or worse, turn against the very country they were defending. Each move was calculated, each strategy part of a larger blueprint to break the Burkinabe military from the inside, to render the country defenseless, to create so much chaos and confusion that the people would lose all faith in Traoré's leadership. And then came the final piece of the puzzle. April 16, 2025, the day of the planned strike. According to intelligence reports, that Wednesday was supposed to be D-Day. On that day, a coordinated assault would be launched against President Traoré and his inner circle, carried out by a group of soldiers recruited by the plotters. But they didn't stop there. Simultaneously, multiple large-scale terrorist attacks were planned across the country, aimed at civilians and critical infrastructure. It was an ambush from both sides. The idea was simple but sinister: force the army into a no-win situation. Should they protect the presidency or defend the people? Either way, the country would fall into chaos. That was the plan. A brutal, multi-pronged attack to cripple Burkina Faso and open the door to foreign control once again. But as we now know, they failed. Now here's the big question everyone is asking. How did this plan fail? Because let's be honest, from everything we've uncovered so far, it seemed foolproof. Every detail was carefully crafted, every T crossed, every I dotted. It looked like nothing could stop it. But here's the miracle. The plot was exposed just in time, and it wasn't some fancy foreign agency that saved the day. No, it was Burkina Faso's own patriots, brave men, both within the army and the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, who had been approached by the traitors, promised money, power, or protection, but refused. These soldiers had a choice: betray their country for personal gain or stand for something bigger. And they chose Burkina Faso. These heroes stepped forward. They went straight to the Burkinabe intelligence services and to the presidency itself, revealing everything they knew. And with that, the puzzle began to unravel. Thanks to their courage, intelligence officers were able to connect the dots and launch a full-scale investigation. It continued for weeks, all the way up to April 15, 2025, just one day before the planned attack. Several traitors were arrested. The plan was dismantled before it could unfold. A national disaster was avoided, but not everyone was caught. Bahari Abdraman, the mastermind from within the army, managed to escape, fleeing across the border into Ivory Coast, where he is now believed to be hiding, and he's not alone. According to the Burkinabe Minister of Security, the true brains behind this treacherous operation aren't even in Burkina Faso. They're in Abidjan, the capital of Ivory Coast. That's right, the entire command center of this anti-Burkina plot is based on foreign soil. Even though the main assault planned for April 16th was foiled, the larger mission isn't over. The goal remains the same: to throw Burkina Faso into total chaos before June 2025, to weaken the government, to fracture the army, to reverse every inch of progress the country has made under Traoré. These traitors, now operating from Ivory Coast, are still working, still recruiting, still trying to ignite a civil crisis. It's insane, it's dangerous, and it's proof that the fight for Burkina Faso's sovereignty is far from over. According to the Burkinabe Minister of Security, the country's intelligence apparatus remains fully alert. He assured the nation that the Burkinabe Intelligence Office is actively monitoring all developments related to the failed plot. Every name, every connection, every suspect is being watched, and when the time is right, justice will be served. In his official address, the minister reaffirmed the government's commitment to transparency, promising to keep the people informed every step of the way. And in a powerful closing message to the nation, he said, "We invite the population to remain calm and vigilant, and to report any suspicious activity. As for the valiant fighting forces, we encourage them to continue their mission with determination while remaining vigilant. Homeland or death, we shall overcome." Those words hit hard, because they speak to what's really at stake. And before we move forward, let's take a moment to honor the brave patriots who stood tall in the face of betrayal. Those soldiers and militia members who were approached by the traitors, who were offered money, promises, or protection to turn against their country, and refused. Because of them, this plot failed. Because of them, Traoré is still alive. Because of them, Burkina Faso still stands. Let's be honest, if these men had chosen otherwise, we might be telling a very different story today. A story of assassination, of a country thrown into panic, of a revolution crushed before it could fulfill its promise. These soldiers are the definition of patriotism. They serve as a reminder to every African that no foreign power can ever destroy a nation from the outside, unless it has willing collaborators on the inside. And that's the hard truth. The greatest weapon of external enemies is often internal betrayal. But when the people inside a country choose loyalty, choose unity, no empire, no foreign plot, no bribe can bring that nation down. So to those heroes we say, kudos. And to the traitors who sold their loyalty for promises of wealth or power, shame. Shame on you for trying to burn your country from within. Your plan was wicked, it was cowardly, and thanks to true patriots, it failed. But as we've seen, this was just one battle. The fight is far from over. But let's pause for a moment and really think about this. How can a fellow African country become the launchpad for the destruction of another? It's heartbreaking, it's shameful, and yet it's happening right in front of our eyes. Since last year, President Traoré has been warning us. He's said it time and time again, that Ivory Coast is working with France to destabilize Burkina Faso, but many dismissed him. Critics said he was overreacting, accusing an innocent neighbor, stirring up unnecessary tension. But now, the evidence is staring us in the face. He was right all along. And so we ask, where is the African unity we've been preaching for decades? How can we talk about Pan-Africanism, about one Africa, when some African governments or individuals willingly become tools of foreign domination, betraying their own people, their own continent? When will we learn? Because the truth is, this isn't new. We've seen this movie before, and every time it ends in tragedy. In 1987, it was Thomas Sankara, a visionary who dared to dream of a self-reliant Africa, betrayed by his closest friend and fellow soldier, Blaise Compaoré, who sold out to France and the United States in exchange for power. In the 1960s, it was Patrice Lumumba, the Hope of Congo, who was handed over to his enemies by Mobutu Sese Seko and other Congolese politicians, all working with Belgium and the CIA. In 2011, during the NATO-led assault on Libya, it was an African president, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, who sided with the United States against Muammar Gaddafi. And what happened each time? Once those leaders were removed, once the foreign powers got what they wanted, they left, and the countries, broken, destabilized, worse off than before. It's a pattern, a cycle of betrayal, chaos, and exploitation. And it keeps repeating because we keep enabling it. Because for every foreign agenda, there's always an African hand willing to execute it. That's the real tragedy. Western powers can't topple Africa on their own. They need collaborators. They need traitors. Until we learn to shut those doors from the inside, until Africans choose loyalty over bribes, unity over division, we will keep losing our leaders, our nations, and our future. But maybe, just maybe, this time can be different. Because the people are waking up. Because this time the plot failed. Because this time Africans stood up and said no. Right now, it's becoming painfully clear. Some Burkinabe soldiers and citizens have betrayed their country, and instead of facing justice, they've found refuge just across the border in Ivory Coast. And what's even more alarming? The Ivory Coast authorities have welcomed them. If Africa were truly united, if the dream of Pan-Africanism meant more than just slogans, then Ivory Coast would be standing shoulder to shoulder with Burkina Faso in this moment. They would be helping to expose these traitors, not shielding them. They would be cooperating with Burkinabe authorities to hand them over for trial. But that's not what's happening. Instead, the message is loud and clear. Ivory Coast is protecting these individuals. And if that's the case, then we have to ask the hard question: why? Ivory Coast has no clear reason to want to destabilize Burkina Faso on its own. There's no natural rivalry, no political or economic motive that justifies this kind of interference. So who stands to gain? Let's be honest. The answer points to one familiar player: France. For decades, France has operated this exact playbook: support or shelter traitors, install friendly regimes, and secure continued access to African wealth and influence. Time and again, France has supported coups, propped up puppets, and pulled strings behind closed doors to protect its post-colonial interests. And now, Burkina Faso is pushing back. Under Traoré, the country has cut ties with French influence, nationalized control over its own destiny, and inspired other Sahel nations to do the same. That makes Traoré a threat, not just to foreign interests, but to the entire system of neo-colonial control that France has maintained in West Africa. So it's not far-fetched to say this: Ivory Coast is acting under pressure, influence, or direct coordination with France. And the goal? To finish what history has shown us time and time again: silence bold African leadership and drag nations back into submission. But this time, things are different. This time, the people are watching. The continent is waking up. And Traoré's survival may just be the spark that ignites a new chapter of resistance across Africa.